Well, I'm not a big Twitter user because, frankly, I don't trust myself with it. The idea that somebody could get my first, second opinion on many things would mean I'd be out of a career quite a long time ago. However, looking through the pages of Instapundit hosted by our friend Glenn Reynolds, invented by him and now hosted by Stephen Green as a co-contributor, I saw a screenshot of a tweet that really got my attention, and this is what I saw. Joy Reid is a host for MSNBC, and regarding the shooting in Texas, she said, "The NRA is soaked and bathed in blood. How do its adherents sleep at night?" To which James Woods replied, "With a Beretta on the nightstand in case yet another Democrat decides to go on a rampage." Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and I often joke about, if shocking news of the decline of the country, and, if you have a heart condition, you may not want to, you may want to turn it off before I tell you that George Soros put $18 billion into the forces of evil. But I'm really quite serious in this case. If you really suffer from high blood pressure, this is not the episode for you, because this is just really, really disgusting. Our friends over at the Federalist have put together a collection of tweets issued by prominent leftists regarding the shooting in Sutherland Springs. And I'm just going to read a couple of them to you and just want to get Stephen Scott's reaction on this. The first one is a variation of this theme, and it's quite a big variation of these themes. So again, I'm going to blur out the profanity because the left can't speak without it, but you'll get the gist of it. A guy named Jack Ford leads it off by saying, "Thinking and praying is saving so many lives, isn't it?" Marissa Cabas says, "Thoughts and prayers for the people who were in a place made for thoughts and prayers when they were gunned the F down." Now we start getting to people who have some actual, I don't want to say weight exactly, but just before the show started, I talked with Stephen Scott about this. I said, I don't know of anybody who does this kind of thing on our side. I'm not saying there aren't right-wing crackpots, but certainly nobody with a following that I know does this kind of thing. But Will Wheaton has quite a following, and Will Wheaton decided to tweet this. In response, by the way, to Paul Ryan's calling for thoughts and prayers for the victims in Texas, Will Wheaton tweeted, "The murdered victims were in a church. If prayers did anything, they'd still be alive, you worthless sack of S." To which Michael Ian Black followed with, a famous comedian, somewhat famous, formerly famous, never really famous, minor comedian Michael Ian Black tweeted out, "Your effing prayers didn't prevent this, and they won't prevent the next one, you cowardly piece of S." And I think that's probably enough of a taste to get us started. Steve, normally Scott would be the go-to guy for this, but I'm saving something for him.
Okay, yeah.
What do you make of this visceral hatred for religion? Forget about the NRA and forget about Paul Ryan and all the rest of it. The fact is, these people are essentially all of them coming out and saying, if prayer worked, they wouldn't have been murdered. As if it's a force field that you have a button on, and if it turns out that things did work that way, they'd be believers too. What do you make about this visceral reaction to the presence of religion in America on the part of the left?
Well, first, I'd just like to say, no matter what kind of an angry person Will Wheaton has turned into, I will always love him for his role as Justin Long in Galaxy Quest. I don't think we should ever forget that work. That said, look, I take a different spin on this, a little slightly different spin, Bill. I don't know if you read Thomas Harris's Hannibal Lecter book, Silence of the Lambs and the rest, but there was an aspect of his personality that didn't make it into the movies, I don't think. While he was in jail in the psychiatric prison, Hannibal Lecter collected stories of tornadoes ripping the rooftops off of churches and killing everybody inside or what have you. That was Hannibal's little thrill, I guess. But it wasn't really a thrill. If I remember correctly, Lecter sort of respected God in his sick little way, because in Lecter's view, God was just doing what all-powerful beings can, maybe even should do, which is to torture and punish those who willingly submit to the Almighty. And I think Lecter got off on that, 'cause that's how he treated people in his life. So I think it's interesting that our friends on the left have a worldview of prayer and death that is more or less in line with Hannibal Lecter.
Well, I'll say one thing about our friends on the left here, and that is this. They have a pretty poor imagination. Let me just say that. as a person who spent a fair amount of time certainly as an agnostic anyway, and really quite a radical, I wouldn't say a radical atheist, but a real objective determinist kind of guy. It's an astonishing failure of imagination for you to be able to imagine that you perceive the intentions of the creator of the universe, assuming he exists. That's all I just want to say. If he in fact exists, it's entirely possible he's not visible to you, and for you to be able to assume you know how his mind works is a bit like a paramecium saying to another paramecium in a petri dish, when I wave my left phalanges, the food will come down from above. And it didn't, so therefore we are not in a microscope, in a laboratory or whatever else. That's about as much perspective as these idiots have. By the way, Will Wheaton, I just want to say this as a personal note. Yours was the first blog I ever read. And for that, I'm deeply grateful, because you are, without question, the most unpopular person in the most popular franchise in science fiction history, certainly the longest lasting. And it's been downhill from Wesley Crusher every single day. You could take that to the grave and try and explain that one to St. Peter. You got to, yeah, I'd like to get into heaven, please. Who are you? I'm the guy who played Wesley Crusher. Down you go.
Yeah.
Down you go. Scott, there's another theme here that is also extremely disturbing. First of all, a couple of people called it terrorism and blamed the NRA for terrorism. The writer of this article responded, let me just say, it's a really great response. A number of people called it terrorism, and it looks like it was Bree Payton wrote this at the Federalist. They said, let me know when the NRA tells people to kill others and commits acts of violence to advance a specific political ideology, and I'll condemn them right alongside of you. But back to this not terribly bright person, which is what you have to, it's a test you have to pass to work at MSNBC, Joy Reid. Here's a couple of tweets from Joy Reid, Scotty. I'd like to get your take on this. She tweeted, remember when Jesus of Nazareth came upon thousands of hungry people and rather than feeding them, thought and prayed, in reference to Paul Ryan's We Need Thought and Prayers for the Victims. And all those lepers he came upon, and rather than healing them, thought and prayed and thought and prayed. Those money changers and the Pharisees, boy, were they relieved when Jesus came in, saw their graft, and walked away thinking and praying. Scott, there's an awful lot wrong with this, but let's just start with the idea that I don't think this woman understands the central tenets of Christianity in the same way that she doesn't understand the central tenets of quantum entanglement. Who's he going to pray to, himself? What do you make of this kind of let me rephrase that. What do you make of this constant leftist attempt to use Christianity and Bible quotes to discredit Christianity?
Okay, this is the first I'm hearing these quotes. So let me just take them one by one. The feeding of the 5,000 or the feeding of the 4,000, there were two separate accounts in the Gospels of Jesus feeding large crowds. The second was the account of Jesus healing the lepers. And then the third, what was the third? Oh, they throwing the money changers out of the temple. Okay. And she's using these as examples to show that Jesus was a man of action and didn't fritter away his time in prayer. Okay.
Right. Yeah, that's right. No, he didn't do that ever.
That's right.
I pray to me every day.
Number one, when Jesus fed the 5,000, he broke the bread and he gave thanks to God, and then he distributed the food. So he actually prayed before the meal. Okay. Imagine. Secondly, in the healing of the lepers, only one of the lepers, there were like 10 lepers, and they all got healed. One of them returned to give thanks to God, and Jesus specifically recognized him and said, Is there only one of you who will come back and worship God, basically, who came back and said, thank you, Lord? Again, prayer, central to that story. Why she would pick these stories, I don't know. The third one, casting the money changers out of the temple. This is perhaps the ultimate irony that she would use this example, because she was throwing the money changers out of the what was called the court of the Gentiles in the temple, because he said, the scriptures say that my Father's house shall be a house of prayer. That was the whole point of the story. How could she possibly get this so wrong? It is so sad.
Because she's not very bright, Scott.
To see these people manipulating this thing. And poor Will Wheaton. I mean, the whole point of his tweet is he's basically implying that if you pray, that you can't do anything, and also that if you pray, your prayers control God. And so therefore, the God, in this case being Will Wheaton, would have, of course, granted the request, which is that those people would not have died. Jesus isn't a bottled genie, Will Wheaton.
And Joy Reid is what happens when you try to act intelligent and try to use people's religion to make a point against their religion. If you're going to do that, Joy, the very least you might do is try to understand it. But I think if you tried to understand things, you wouldn't be working at MSNBC, really, would you? So it's just sad and pathetic. The thing that struck me most about this was, first of all, the fact, as I mentioned earlier, I am not aware of ever having, nor am I aware of Steve or Scott ever having, or anybody that I know ever having gloated or basically tried to rub people's faces in the fact that something terrible happened to them. I certainly didn't do it in Charlotte. I didn't do it in any of these cases because it's indecent and because it's inhuman and because it's beneath the dignity. And not only beneath the dignity, it's beneath the imagination of decent people to do something like this. It's beneath their imagination. And the fact that the left turns these things out in industrial quantities after a situation like this is yet another reminder to me that we must be on the side of the angels, if only because the people who are arguing with us are so clearly on the side of the devils. Pretty simple for me, really. That'll do it for your right angle on the lovely, compassionate tweets on our friends on the tolerant and inclusive left with all of their diversity of thought. I'm Bill Whittle with Steve Green and Scott Ott. If you look down at the numbers, you're going to see we're just short of 100,000 subscribers on BillWhittle.com. Doesn't cost you a penny to push the button. If we've already crossed it, then let's head for 200,000. Yeah. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.